In 170 AD, a man sat alone in a war tent on the frozen banks of the Danube. Outside, plague was killing his soldiers faster than the enemy could. Inside, by candlelight, he wrote a single sentence to himself. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. That man was the most powerful human being on earth, and he was writing himself a leadership manual that no one else was ever supposed to read. Today we're stealing it. Because the truth is, most leadership advice you've heard is garbage. It's about charisma, hustle, fake it till you make it. But the greatest leader in Roman history didn't lead with charisma. He led with command of himself. And by the end of this video, you will understand the 7 principles that turned ordinary men into emperors, generals, and statesmen who are still remembered 2,000 years after their bones turned to dust. Principle number 4 alone will change how you handle every difficult person in your life. Stay with me. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the channel where ancient philosophy meets modern life. If you're new here, we take the teachings of Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus and turn them into tools you can actually use at work, at home, and in your own mind. If that sounds like something you need, hit subscribe now, because what you're about to hear might be the most practical video we've ever made. Let's begin. Most people think Stoicism is about being unemotional, gritting your teeth, suppressing pain. That is not Stoicism. That is just suffering quietly. Real Stoicism, the Stoicism practiced by Marcus Aurelius as he ruled an empire, by Seneca as he advised a tyrant, by Cato as he stood alone against the collapse of a republic, was never about numbing yourself. It was about command. Command over your reactions. Command over your judgments. Command over the only territory you will ever truly own, your own mind. And here's the part nobody tells you. Every single quality we associate with great leadership today traces directly back to this philosophy. Calm under pressure, clarity in chaos, the ability to absorb other people's panic without becoming infected by it, the discipline to do the right thing when no one is watching, and the wrong thing would be so much easier. Marcus Aurelius didn't inherit those traits. He built them, sentence by sentence, in a journal he never intended anyone to read, called Meditations. It wasn't written for fame. It was written because leadership, real leadership, requires constant maintenance of the self. You cannot lead others if you cannot first lead the war inside your own head. So today we're extracting 7 principles from that war. 7 tools used by emperors, generals, and slaves-turned-philosophers, because yes, one of our greatest teachers, Epictetus, started his life in chains. If a man who was literally enslaved could develop leadership principles that emperors later studied, what's your excuse? Let's get into it. Principle 1 starts with something almost every leader gets backwards. Principle 1, lead yourself before you lead anyone else. Epictetus said it plainly. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Most people try to lead from the outside in. They study tactics. They copy the mannerisms of leaders they admire. They learn to talk a certain way, stand a certain way, project confidence they don't feel. But Stoic leadership works the opposite direction, from the inside out. Marcus Aurelius didn't wake up one day and decide to act like an emperor. He spent decades under the tutelage of his teacher, Junius Rusticus, examining his own impulses. Where does my anger come from? Why did that insult land so hard? What am I actually afraid of when I avoid this decision? Think about the worst leader you've ever had. Not the strictest, not the most demanding, the worst. I'd bet money that what made them unbearable wasn't incompetence. It was that they had never done this internal work. Every insecurity they carried, they unloaded onto their team. Every fear of looking weak became a need to dominate. Every unresolved wound became your problem to manage. That's what happens when someone tries to lead others before they've led themselves. The unaddressed parts of them leak out and become everyone else's burden. The Stoic principle here is brutal in its simplicity. You will lead exactly as well as you know yourself, not 1 inch further. So before you ask, how do I get people to follow me? Ask the harder question first. What is currently running my own behavior? And is it something I'd want followers to inherit? This is uncomfortable work. It's also the only foundation anything else in this video will stand on. Keep that in mind because Principle 2 builds directly on top of it. And it's the one principle almost every modern leader gets exactly backwards. Principle 2. Control what is yours, release what isn't. Here is the most famous sentence in all of Stoic philosophy, and almost nobody applies it correctly. Some things are within our power, while others are not. Epictetus. Sounds simple. It is not simple. It is one of the hardest disciplines a leader will ever practice. Picture a CEO watching the stock market crash on a day she did absolutely nothing wrong. Picture a general whose perfect battle plan gets ruined by a sudden storm. Picture you, last week, doing everything right at work, and still getting blamed for someone else's mistake. The amateur leader spends their energy raging against the storm, the crash, the unfair blame. The Stoic leader asks one question instead: what part of this is actually mine to control? Marcus Aurelius ruled during one of the worst plagues in Roman history, simultaneously fighting wars on multiple borders, while his own co-emperor Lucius Verus eventually died from the disease itself. He could not control the plague. He could not control the barbarian tribes pressing against the border. He could not control how long the empire's resources would last. What could he control? His own response, his own discipline, the orders he gave that day with the information he had that day. This is the dividing line between leaders who burn out and leaders who endure. The ones who burn out are fighting battles on territory they never owned in the first place. Other people's opinions, the economy, the weather, the past. The ones who endure have drawn a hard, clear line: this is mine, that is not, and I will pour all my energy only into what's mine. Try this test on your own life right now. Think of something stressing you out today. Now ask, is this actually within my control? If yes, act. If no, and this is the hard part, let it go completely. Not let it go as a hashtag. Let it go as a discipline. The way Marcus did, daily, with a journal and a clear mind. I want you to comment below with one thing you're going to consciously release control of after watching this video. Writing it down, even in a YouTube comment, makes it real. Now, controlling what's yours is one thing, but what happens when what's yours includes responding to people who are actively trying to provoke you? That's Principle 3, and it might be the single most useful tool in this entire video. Principle 3. The gap between event and response. There's a teaching from Epictetus that modern psychology has spent the last 50 years rediscovering and rebranding. Men are disturbed not by events, but by their judgments about events. Translation: nothing has ever made you angry. You made yourself angry through the story you told about what happened. Let's make this real. Imagine you're leading a team meeting. A junior employee interrupts you mid-sentence and corrects you in front of everyone. Your chest tightens instantly. That's the event. But here's what most people miss. Between that interruption and your reaction, there's a gap, a space. And in that space, your mind is doing something lightning fast. It's writing a story. He's disrespecting me. She thinks I'm incompetent. Everyone's watching to see if I'll let this slide. That story, not the interruption itself, is what produces the surge of anger, the urge to snap back, the damage to your authority you might do in the next 3 seconds. A Stoic leader trains themselves to notice that gap, to slow it down, to ask, before reacting, what's the most useful interpretation of this moment, not just the most emotionally satisfying one. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this obsessively. He reminded himself again and again that the people who annoyed him, betrayed him, even plotted against him, they weren't doing it because they were evil. They were doing it because they were confused about what's actually good for them. It's silly to be surprised that the world produces bad people. It would be like being surprised that fig trees produce figs. That's not weakness. That's the most powerful tool a leader can have. Because the leader who can pause in that gap, even for 2 seconds, has access to 100 possible responses. The leader who can't has access to exactly one. Whatever their nervous system fires off first. Next time someone provokes you, at work, at home, anywhere, try this. Don't suppress the feeling. Just notice the gap. Ask, what story am I about to tell myself, and is there a more useful one available? This single habit, practiced daily, will change more relationships in your life than any communication course you could take. And it leads directly into something every leader eventually has to face. The people who don't just provoke you accidentally, but who oppose you on purpose. Principle 4, how to handle opposition and difficult people. This is the one I promised you at the start. Pay close attention. Every leader eventually faces an enemy. Not a metaphorical one, a real one. Someone undermining them in meetings. A rival competing for the same promotion. A board member who wants them gone. History gives us no better case study than Marcus Aurelius and the revolt of Avidius Cassius. Cassius was one of Marcus's most trusted generals. And in 175 AD, believing a false rumor that Marcus had died, Cassius declared himself emperor, a direct, armed rebellion against the man who had given him his command. Here's what a normal ruler does in this situation. Hunts down the traitor's family, executes anyone connected to the betrayal, makes a brutal example to deter future rebellion. That was standard practice, expected even. Here's what Marcus actually did. He marched toward the confrontation, and before he could even arrive, Cassius's own officers killed him, hoping to win favor with the emperor. When his head was brought to Marcus as a trophy, the emperor refused to look at it. He ordered it buried, not displayed. And then, this is the part that should stop you cold, he pardoned Cassius's family, his co-conspirators, and the cities that had supported the revolt. He wrote that he wished, more than anything, that he could have spoken with Cassius and possibly reconciled with him. Why? Marcus explains it himself in Meditations. It is the act of a fool to expect figs in winter. People who oppose you, betray you, undermine you, they are acting according to what they believe is good, however twisted that belief might be. Punishing them with cruelty doesn't correct that confusion. It just adds your own cruelty to the world's total supply. This doesn't mean weakness. Marcus still marched an army to confront a literal rebellion. Stoic leadership is not passive. But notice the discipline. He separated the necessary action, addressing the threat, from the unnecessary, emotion, hatred, revenge, cruelty for its own sake. For you, this might look like the co-worker who took credit for your idea, the friend who spread a rumor, the competitor who plays dirty. The Stoic response isn't to let them walk over you. It's to handle the situation with total clarity and refuse to let hatred for that person become a second, self-inflicted wound on top of the first. Seneca put it even more sharply. The best revenge is to not be like that. If this principle is landing for you, if you've got someone in your life right now that this applies to, drop a comment. Just one word. Cassius, I want to see how many of you are dealing with your own version of this story right now. Now, handling enemies is one skill. But the hardest tests of leadership rarely come from enemies. They come from exhaustion, from the days you simply don't want to keep going. That's Principle 5. Principle 5. Leading through weariness and doubt. There's a passage in Meditations that hits differently once you know the context. Marcus writes to himself, "In the morning when you rise unwillingly, let this thought be present. I am rising to do the work of a human being." This isn't a man who woke up every day thrilled to rule an empire. This is a man running an empire during plague, war, family betrayal, and his own declining health, who sometimes did not want to get out of bed. And he said so, to himself in private, with no audience and nothing to perform. This matters enormously, because the image we have of great leaders is almost always wrong. We imagine they felt certain, driven, untouchable. The truth, almost universally, is that they felt exhausted, doubtful, and tempted to quit, and led anyway. Marcus had a phrase he repeated to himself constantly, almost like a private mantra. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think, not as a morbid thought, but as clarity. If today might be your last day of leading, what would you actually choose to focus your remaining energy on? Probably not the office politics. Probably not the small grievance you've been carrying for a week. Probably the people who depend on you and the work that actually matters. This is what separates burnout from endurance. Burnout happens when you try to manufacture motivation you don't feel. Endurance happens when you stop waiting to feel motivated and instead simply ask, what does the work in front of me require, regardless of how I feel about it today? If you're in a season right now where leading your team, your family, even just your own life, feels heavier than usual, I want you to hear this clearly. That feeling is not a sign you're failing. Marcus Aurelius, ruling the most powerful empire on earth, felt it too, on more mornings than history bothered to record. The difference between him and someone who quit wasn't the absence of weariness. It was what he did the moment after noticing it. This brings us to one of the most counterintuitive, Stoic ideas of all, one that completely reframes failure itself. Principle 6. Turn obstacles into fuel. You've probably heard the phrase, the obstacle is the way. It's become almost a cliché online, but the original context is far more powerful than the meme version. Marcus Aurelius wrote, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This wasn't poetic optimism. It was a practical leadership tool. Here's how it worked in practice. A Stoic leader, faced with an obstacle, asks a very specific question. Not, why is this happening to me? But what does this obstacle make possible that wasn't possible before? A blocked road forces a general to discover new terrain. Terrain his enemy doesn't know either. A budget cut forces a team to find a more efficient process they'd never have found with comfortable resources. A public failure forces a leader to demonstrate, in front of everyone, exactly how they recover, which builds more trust than a smooth, uneventful success ever could. This isn't about pretending obstacles don't hurt. It's about refusing to let the obstacle be the end of the story. Every obstacle a leader faces is also simultaneously raw material, fuel that can be converted into demonstrated character, sharper strategy, or unexpected opportunity. The event itself is neutral. What you build from it is not. Think about a setback you're currently facing in your career, your business, your relationships. I'm not asking you to fake positivity about it. I'm asking you to ask one honest question. What does this specific obstacle make possible that an easier path wouldn't have? Comment your answer below if you're willing. Sometimes saying it out loud, even to strangers on the internet, is the first step in actually believing it. We've covered leading yourself, controlling what's yours, the gap between event and reaction, handling enemies, leading through exhaustion, and turning obstacles into fuel. There's one principle left, and it might be the most important one of all, because it's the one that determines whether everything else actually lasts. Principle 7. Lead for something bigger than yourself. Marcus Aurelius had a concept the Greeks called oikeiosis, the expanding circle of concern. It starts with care for yourself, extends to your family, then your community, then your nation, and in its fullest form, to humanity itself. He wrote, "What injures the hive injures the bee." In other words, there is no version of true leadership that benefits you while genuinely harming the people you lead. If you're winning at their expense, you haven't actually won. You've just delayed the bill. This is perhaps the most radical Stoic leadership idea of all, because it cuts directly against the modern obsession with personal brand, personal wins, personal legacy. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man alive, spent his private journal reminding himself over and over that his power existed for something, not for its own sake. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Look at the leaders whose names actually survive history with honor, not the ones who simply held power the longest. but the ones who used it for something larger than their own comfort. And look at the ones history remembers as cautionary tales. Almost always, the common thread is that their leadership orbited entirely around themselves. Here's the practical test. Ask yourself, right now, who benefits from your leadership besides you? If the honest answer is barely anyone, that's not a moral failing to feel ashamed of. It's information. It's a signal pointing toward exactly what needs to change. Because the 7 principles in this video, self-command, control of what's yours, the gap between event and response, grace toward opposition, endurance through weariness, transforming obstacles, and leading for something bigger than yourself. None of them are decoration. They are not personality traits some people are born with and others aren't. They are disciplines, daily, repeatable, learnable disciplines. Marcus Aurelius wasn't born an emperor with these qualities installed. He built them, one journal entry at a time, often while exhausted, often while doubting himself, often with no one watching. Which means there is absolutely nothing stopping you from building them too. 2,000 years from now, almost no one will remember the quarterly earnings, the office politics, the small humiliations that feel so enormous right now. What outlasts all of it is character, built quietly. In private, the way Marcus Aurelius built his, never expecting anyone to read the proof. So here's what I want you to do. Pick exactly one of these 7 principles, just one, and apply it this week. Not all 7, one. Maybe it's noticing the gap. Before you react to the next person who provokes you, maybe it's finally releasing your grip on something that was never yours to control in the first place. Whichever one you choose, write it in the comments below. I read every single one, and I want to know which principle hit you the hardest today, because that's usually the one you need most. If this video gave you even one tool you'll actually use, do 3 things for me. Hit like, so this reaches the next person who needs to hear it. Subscribe, because we publish new Stoic wisdom every single week. Built exactly like this, deep, practical, and rooted in the real lives of the philosophers who lived it. And share this with the one person in your life who's carrying a leadership burden right now, whether that's at a company, in a family, or just inside their own head. Marcus Aurelius once wrote himself a simple instruction, and I'll leave you with it tonight. Waste no more time talking about what a good leader should be. Be one. I'll see you in the next one.